what happened is I started seeing the same tactics that the Soviets used against Christianity happening in America. And I looked deeper, and all three of the major tactics that I researched that the Soviets did, their playbook to destroy Christianity, all happening in America, some for over a century, and it was absolutely shocking.
Welcome to my podcast today. I want to talk about the subject of Marxism and how it has just permeated every aspect of our society today, but in a fun way, because I'm going to introduce Julie Behling, and she is the creator of the film called Beneath Sheep's Clothing. And it's an important film that I think every family, every church, everyone needs to watch this film, whether you're familiar or not even slightly familiar with how communism is still alive and well today and in the United States of America. So just to give you a little bit of an idea why we're even talking about this today, sometimes I go online and I say things like public education is Marxist, and it makes people furious and they want proof, like show me the proof that it's Marxist. You'll read that social justice is Marxist. DEI is Marxist, and people will just say, show me what that means. That just shows you that understanding Marxism is rare. People in society today don't really understand how much Marxism is in every aspect of everything that we see and do. So it's a lack of communication, and it's definitely a lack of education. You should ask yourself why people think that Hitler was the worst tyrant of the 20th century. Believe it or not, he was not the worst of them. Why do people not know who Joseph Stalin, what did he actually do? And Mao Zedong, what was he responsible for? Multiple other communist dictators who killed vastly larger numbers of people than Hitler did. Why do we use the term McCarthyism as a disparaging term today when we look back at the mid-century and make fun of people who are hunting down communists? Why do we call it a witch hunt in the 20th century? Why is it a joke on the internet now? It's because communism is not taught and Marxism is not understood. Now, most curriculums, most classrooms may do a skim milk version of who Karl Marx was and a little overview of his theories, but then they go on to hail his solutions as if they're great ideas. And these are the things that will fix our society, but they're not taught about the deadly dictators who put communism into practice over the 20th century, killing over 100 million people by executions and starvations. In this film, we're going to talk about the film that Julie is responsible for, but there are some really well-researched people that are interviewed in this film, and one of them is James Lindsay. And there's a quote from him. He says, "In every communist society in history, there is one thing in common besides the communist rulers themselves. The people being put through it realized they were under communism one day too late." We don't want that to happen to us. I recently taught a class on communism just to some local homeschool students in my area. And many of the parents told me this exact thing. My husband mentioned to his friends at work that my kids are taking a class on communism, or I told a friend that my kids were taking this class. And every single stranger or friend or coworker said, why? As if there's no need to learn about communism. Guys, everybody needs to understand it. We need to revisit the works of Marx and see how they were put into practice over the 20th century and understand what they're doing to our society today, in our culture, in education at all levels, and even in many churches. And so this is why I have Julie on the podcast today. So welcome, Julie. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you brought this film to life?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And thanks, that was a really good introduction to the topic. I mean, this topic, I guess, kind of chose me. It was not something that I ever would have thought of. But I mean, I did study Russian in college. And then I was a missionary in Russia for a year and a half after I finished my undergraduate years. And that was in the late 90s. So it was a long time ago.
Okay.
Just a few years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's like a long time ago. But Russia was it was kind of crazy. But I met some people. I actually had some interactions with people who had been faithful Christians throughout the Soviet era. Their family had been faithful and actively living their faith. And I had never met people with such amazing faith before. And then I saw, of course, the people who had been casualties, people who had been in the Gulag, people whose families had been ravaged by the Soviet state. I met a lot of traumatized elderly people. But I came back to the United States after my year and a half in Russia, and I ended up going to graduate school for Russian and East European studies, which is basically Russian and Soviet history, and Russian language and literature, and a dual master's. And then I wrote my thesis on underground Christian movements in the Soviet Union and their survival tactics and the tactics of the Soviet state to try to destroy Christianity. Yeah, and as I was working on that project, it took 2 years, a lot of original, well, primary sources that I was researching. I was able to go back to Russia, meet some people who were part of some of these underground churches and interview them and get their church histories. And I kind of felt like there was like a greater purpose for me to do this research. But it was a few years after I finished grad school that that purpose began to come to light. What happened is I started seeing the same tactics that the Soviets used against Christianity happening in America. And I looked deeper, and all three of the major tactics that I had researched that the Soviets did, their playbook to destroy Christianity, all happening in America, some for over a century. And it was absolutely shocking. So that was the beginning of me researching for my book, Beneath Sheep's Clothing, which I wrote most of between 2009, 2010, 2011, and finally published in 2022. Then the film came into existence after that. So that's kind of a long story, but that's how I got involved in this research.
Okay, well, it's such a good film, and I like that you have a book version too because I like books. But I know so many people just they want to see something, they want a visual, and I think that this film does such an excellent job of taking you from the very beginning, you know, how communism originated and then how it was implemented over and over and over in the 20th century, but not just the classic communist dictators either. Also, y'all do a great job of pulling in the cultural Marxism and how in this country, you pointed out, you know, communist dictators just don't fly. You know, we've got it too good. Who's gonna throw capitalism over? I mean, there's little pockets of that, but most people have no problem with capitalism. So what you've done is such a great expose of how it's been converted to a new kind of Marxism for a capitalist society, and that's through the social justice movement. So it's a very, I think it's a very enlightening film that you've packed so much into, what is it, an hour and 45 minutes or something?
Yeah.
Because I just taught about 6 weeks on it to some kids, and I felt like I didn't have nearly enough time to tell them everything there was to know. But still, this film does an excellent job of that. And I noticed, like you just mentioned that when you studied Russian history, Soviet history, and then you wrote your thesis on the underground church. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you learned? Because that, to me, what you said, first of all, let me back up. You said, I noticed that what I had researched and what I had learned from actual Russian citizens was now happening here. And I've heard that from people from China and people from other countries. Same thing. They see it, they recognize it, and they say, wait a second, we cannot do this. What did you just tell us a little bit more about the underground church there and how it had to happen because of communism?
Yeah, so most people who have studied Russian and Soviet history at all, they know that when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in 1917, and when Lenin came through and they killed the Tsar and they established the Soviet Union, that the Russian Orthodox Church, which was the official church of Russia, came under massive attack to the point where they destroyed churches, they arrested, tortured, executed, and imprisoned the clergy, terrorized the people who were still, practicing. That those tactics actually backfired. So by World War II, by the end of World War II, they kept some of the same tactics. They kept the anti-religious propaganda. That's one tactic. Anti-religious propaganda through all aspects of society, pro-communist propaganda. They kept that tactic, but they switched things up a little bit. They stopped persecuting all Christians equally. And what they did is they set up a registered church where you could register with the government and follow these really restrictive rules, like you couldn't teach children under the age of 18 about God. You couldn't bring them to church. You couldn't get baptized. You had to be on a waiting list for a few years to be baptized, and you had to be 21 years old, something ridiculous. You had to praise the Soviet government, all these things that you had to do to be able to practice your religion without, being threatened to be arrested and imprisoned and various things. Whereas those who were like, no, we're not selling our souls to that, the dissident Christians, the underground Christians, and you did have some Russian Orthodox, but a lot of these were underground Baptists, underground evangelicals like Pentecostal, Seventh day Adventists. Also, Jehovah's Witnesses were very highly persecuted. They were the ones who continued to receive that heavy hand of the government arresting them, taking their children and putting their kids forcibly in state-run orphanages until the age of 18. They would take them and arrest some of them and put them in psychiatric prisons, psychiatric hospitals that were really prisons, and forcibly treat them with psychotropic drugs because, oh, they have this mental illness because they say they hear the voice of God. So we're going to cure them of those delusions. A lot of really horrific tactics. That was just for the dissident Christians, the unregistered Christians, the ones that were like, we're not selling our souls to communism. Sorry, just not doing it. And then the other tactic is the infiltration of the churches. They infiltrated, starting after World War II, starting in the 60s, really. They sent KGB agents undercover into the seminaries to become priests and pastors. And then those were the ones that would rise up in the ranks of the church. They would control the church from within, even to the point it was so widespread that when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church himself was a KGB agent who had infiltrated decades before. And so it really killed the church from within. And most shocking of all to me in my research was when I first learned that the churches in the United States had been infiltrated by communists over a century ago. And that infiltration from the top down through the seminaries was very, very significantly completed by mid-20th. We're talking half of America's mainline denominations were very heavily infiltrated from the top down with communists by the 1950s.
That just makes my skin crawl. And
yeah.
I think today we see clips on the internet of very clearly Marxist priests and pastors wearing the rainbow flag. And basically, they don't even preach the scripture anymore. They preach social justice. So I think when you explain that way back in the mid 20th century, the communists were infiltrating the American church denominations, it shouldn't be any surprise to us today. I don't think it's an accident that there are so many of these very liberal social justice preachers. And I have to say that with the quotations every time because they are not men of God. They're not women of God either. And so we've seen that in so many denominations. I remember this topic actually, this cultural Marxism topic actually came to my attention around 2019. I think that was the year when the Southern Baptist Convention was considering adding critical race theory to their convention. I think that was the year. Anyway, that's when I really started noticing this as more than just social justice, but that the church was buying into this critical Marxism. And so I know for people that have not really looked into this topic, it seems like a huge jump from communist dictators in Soviet Russia, through to cultural Marxism in the 21st century America. But it's absolutely connected. It's all connected. And so can you explain a little bit more about that, how we got to this cultural Marxist state in 21st century America in a nutshell?
Yeah.
No, that's asking a lot, but just for people who still have not listened, researched, or even become aware of this problem.
I think one thing that's important to understand is that the people at the top who are funding these communist takeovers often themselves are not communists. Communism is a really great control structure to keep the people as disempowered as possible. You're in the name of helping the oppressed, you're actually taking power away from the people, consolidating it into a tiny elite at the top. And so it's not that all the people pushing this themselves are avowed communists. This is not in the film, but it's in my book. It's kind of like a pyramid scam. At the very top of the pyramid, you have the money bags of the people who are funding all of this and the puppet masters that are controlling it all. They're using communism as a tool to control the masses. The next level down of the communist enablers in America and the West would be the avowed communists. And that's very, very tiny percentage of true, dyed in the wool communists that believe in that message. The next level down is quite large, and it's the fellow travelers with the communists. This is where you have your socialists and progressives and leftists that they like the idea of taking care of the poor and the underprivileged and helping the oppressed. They don't want a violent revolution, though. And this is, we have a lot of these democratic socialists and a lot of these people in our country. And then the next level down is we have the people that they kind of just buy the lines. They don't really have a deep understanding. And these will be the people that went and marched for Black Lives Matter in 2020 because they don't want Black people to be murdered by police, even though that's not really what happened. But and these are well-meaning people. They're like, oh no, we can't do that, And a lot of our young people in the schools are falling for these lines, and they're not really hardcore leftists at all. They just don't want people to be harmed. And this message sounds appealing to them. Then the next level down, those are the dupes, or the quote unquote useful idiots. Yeah. So then there's what I call level 2 dupes. And these are people that they know that something feels kind of off. Why are all the kids being transed? Why are all these weird things happening? Why are churches promoting drag queens? More extreme examples, but they don't really have the confidence or the courage to speak out about it. They don't want to get fired from their job. They don't want to get called a racist or a bigot. So there's less of those people now than maybe a few years ago, but because there's more of a critical mass of people speaking out. But still, those level 2 dupes have also enabled these agendas by not stopping it, not speaking out.
Yes. And I think that, like you said, we've seen a little bit more of an uprising of just the average person saying, wait, this doesn't sound good. I don't know why, but it's just not right. So Xi Van Fleet, who left China in the 80s, and she was a child during Mao's revolution, Mao's Cultural Revolution, and she came to America in the 80s to go to school. And in I think around 2020, when there were so many parents speaking at school board meetings, she had a wake up call too. She knows Chinese communism. She understands the Cultural Revolution. And she said, critical race theory is communism. This is Marxism. This is Mao's playbook. And she was trying to warn parents at Virginia public schools during 2020. And now she's an outspoken critic of all of this. And she's able to tie actual Chinese communism to what's happening in America today. Because more and more people have an inkling of what this is, yes, there's, like you said, there's a critical mass that has finally opened their eyes, but there's still so many more. And I think that, like we just talked about, the danger in the churches is huge because Christians do have compassion. We are supposed to have compassion on our fellow man. We're supposed to care for the poor and the needy and love people. But often all the critical theory subsets, gender theory and all, there's so many in that incredibly ridiculous list. They tug on the heartstrings, like you said. And so social justice becomes part of Christianity, and it never should have. And that's where people need to understand social justice is Marxism and socialism, where we say yes, we should feed the poor. Yes, we should feed the poor, but Jesus didn't advocate for government programs and taking from everyone to give to a few. It's on individuals and Christians to give charitably, and
It
that
has to be
is the difference.
voluntary. It has to be
Yes.
voluntary. Whereas with communism, it's forced. The forcible redistribution of wealth. When we voluntarily redistribute our wealth to help the underprivileged, that is what is taught in the Bible, not to forcibly at gunpoint take your property and your goods from you to give to someone else. And this is with the state playing God, as if the state knows exactly how these things should be allocated.
Because as anybody who would read about the state dictators in Soviet Russia, in China, in Korea, Vietnam, and just keep going down the list through the 20th century, it's very evident that the state does more than just give out stuff. They give out very little, but they also kill, they separate families, they destroy people, and they ruin their countries. Every single time they bring on a famine, people starve and die, and the dictators don't have an explanation for it. And as you point out so well in your film, God is not allowed anywhere within communism. It is an atheist religion, and that should scare all Christians, because you can't say we're going to give to the poor in the name of charity through the state, because that is exactly how the communist dictators were able to sell their ideas in the very beginning, and it fails every single time.
Yeah, and I want to point one more thing out about Marxism. What is Marxism? The kernel of Marxism is it is the playbook to create a revolution, a communist revolution,
Mm-hmm.
and it is
Mm-hmm.
fed by grievance. And so what you do is you find a group of people who are, and this is in my book, it's in my film. Communism marries a truth to a lie. Marxism marries a truth to a lie. You take something that's true. There's a group of oppressed people, but what to do about that?
Mm-hmm.
With Marxism, you find an oppressed group of people, you point out to them who their oppressor is, and you stoke anger and
Mm-hmm.
resentment and grievance and violence for the oppressed people to rise up violently to overthrow and to take back what is theirs from their oppressors. And with classical Marxism, the oppressed group is called the proletariat. It's the working class people, the peasant, the poor people. And then the oppressor class is the bourgeoisie, which includes the wealthier, but also includes middle class people, business
Mm-hmm.
owners. And so Marxism runs, the fuel for Marxism is resentment and grievance and hatred. It's the opposite of Christianity. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is the antidote? The antidote is forgiveness, and of course, setting boundaries with people who, are perpetrators against us. But we don't stew in resentment. And so, anytime you can see it's Marxism, if people are talking about things that happened a long time ago over and over, they can't let it go.
Mm-hmm.
No one today was alive when slavery happened. Yes, there can be relics of slavery. Yes, there can be things that happen that are horrible, and we should talk about them. But to tell young black kids today that they are victims because of slavery is evil. And to tell young white kids that they are oppressors because by nature of the color of their skin, that means that they're somehow responsible for slavery and for racism and that they're automatically racist, that's evil. Anytime you see this, and you see it with feminism, the patriarchy, they can't stop talking about the patriarchy. With the Marxist queer theory, the oppressor classes is heterosexuals, heteronormativity, where it's normal to be heterosexual. So they're actually targeting just the nature of heterosexuality itself. And then with the trans thing, the oppressor class is where it's normal for males to be males and females to be females, what they call cis normativity. And so they have all this media targeted to try to tear down the oppressive gender construct. Basically, communists, one more thing in Marxists, you have to see, they're really angry at reality. They're really
Mm-hmm.
angry at the reality that there are males and females. They're angry at God that we're here on this planet and that we have to work for
Yes.
our subsistence, and they want to blame all their problems on someone else, and that's an ugly part of human nature that's being exploited in Marxism.
Yeah, I always tell my kids, if you see something that says us versus them, that is Marxism. They're trying to divide somebody from somebody else. And what often suffers is the nuclear family,
Yeah.
whether it's through capitalism or the gender theory. It can happen in so many ways. But even the patriarchy or the bourgeoisie can even include Christians, and the proletariat is everybody who's not a Christian. And so it is very important to understand what Karl Marx wrote, to understand how they're using that now to divide everybody along every single line possible. Fat versus thin, educated versus uneducated. I am not kidding. The Sydney Sweeney ridiculousness that's going on right now because American Eagle decided to use a white girl in their ads, and she said something about having good genes. It's making people lose their minds, and it's such a classic example of this ridiculousness of cultural Marxism, because she should not be allowed in an ad. She should not be able to represent straight white females. But it's because the left has pushed so far to the extreme that now they consider it rude to actually use a white person in an ad. And something that was very normal 30 years ago, now it's racist, it's homophobic, it's fat phobic, it's everything phobic. And it's just a classic example of dividing us from them. That's where we are now. It's utterly ridiculous, and it's a classic daily example. All you have to do is look at the internet every single day to see Marxism is everywhere. And that's why I think your film is so important, because I think people think, wow, the world's crazy. What's happening? What people have gone off the rails. It's all been planned. And tell us a little bit about the long march through the institutions, if you don't mind, so people can see that this is not just an accident of a chaotic world. This has all been planned, and it's very carefully coming to fruition now.
Yeah, so there was an Italian Marxist named Antonio Gramsci, and he was a little bit distraught that communism was not spreading throughout the West. And so he kind of went through philosophically to pick out the reasons why that was. And what he came up with was that Western institutions were too strong. And so they didn't allow the Western nations to fall to communism. So he proposed a plan in which the Marxists, the communists, would go in and infiltrate the culture making institutions of the West in order to weaken it in the West from within. And then once those cultural making institutions were sufficiently subverted, then those nations would fall. And the 5 institutions that he pointed out specifically needed to be infiltrated and weakened and destroyed from within were the religion, education, the media, the family, and the legal system. And with those
And looky
systems
there.
sufficiently weakened, then you can pick your overripe fruit and have your communist revolutions in the West.
Yeah, they've been successful. We are just now seeing the fruit of that. And Antonio Gramsci was 1920s and 30s, correct? So 100 years of the long march through the institutions. They've been patient and plotting their time, and here we are. And it's not chaos. It's not an accident. It's not just that there's no prayer in schools. I believe that some people mistakenly think, well, that's because we took prayer out of schools, or because we don't have the 10 Commandments in the classroom. Those are already symptoms of a deeper problem. Those are not the cause of the problem. Those are some of the symptoms of earlier problems, like the long march through the institutions. And so I often tell people, you could try to put prayer back in school now. That's not going to change anything. There's going to be, for one thing, too many fights over who gets to lead the prayer and who are we praying to. But you already got a system now where kids are being educated deeply into these Marxist ideas. It's not a class. It is embedded in every single grade level and every bit of the curriculum. And that's one of the institutions, that you mentioned. Besides the church, I think that is the other most dangerous place that cultural Marxism is embedded. And parents really, really, really need to understand this. I am a die-hard, absolutely everyone should get their kids out of public school and homeschool. And for so many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that this stuff is embedded, and the 10 Commandments in the classroom is not going to change this. The curriculum is filling kids' minds 7 or 8 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week for 13 years plus university. This is the problem. This cultural Marxism is the problem.
It's not even just that it's filling their minds. It's that even without teachers understanding, they're using brainwashing tactics with the social and emotional learning curricula. It's actually using very subtle, very well-studied brainwashing tactics to, without parental knowledge or consent, to retool the ideological framework of our children, to delete the framework that many of us would like our kids to have, which would be Judeo-Christian ethics at the very least, if not outright Christianity, and Americanism, where, people, you can work hard and you can get ahead and you can have the American dream. To delete those ideologies from our children, the ideologies that helped build America to what it is, and insert diversity, equity, and inclusion as their new foundational ideology. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are Marxist, because they are all oppressed versus oppressor constructs. That's what's happening.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's what's happening through this social and emotional learning. That's now, it's not just even like a class that you can have your kids stop going to, because now it's embedded, it's in PE, it's in recess. They have embedded social and emotional learning, and the teachers don't understand what they're doing. The teachers themselves have been subverted, but even the well-meaning teachers. And then through this whole child education where they're giving the schools even more, the schools have clinics in them now the schools. Let's feed the kids all their meals. Let's extend the school day. Let's have a bond, an emotional bond at school that replaces the family. And let's have all the data collection that goes with it. You guys, I'm actually working on another series of videos, a shorter, like mini films to help educate people on this. I'm trying to work on that now, taking donations because I'm just working on this on my own. But we need people to understand these brainwashing tactics that they're using on the kids. It's not just that they're teaching their kids brains, it's that they are using these brainwashing tactics. This is why many of our kids, and it's going to be increasingly so if we don't interrupt it, are emerging from schools as leftists,
Mm-hmm.
not appreciating America, not appreciating the founding fathers of America, wanting to throw away the American dream and wanting to embrace socialism. This is why.
It is. And I think I see a lot of well meaning people talk about SEL or social emotional learning online, and they say, well, kids do need to learn how to manage their emotions. Yep, they do. Parents can teach them how to do that. And it doesn't take a course, even. It's called parenting. But what they're doing, if anything that has a name, you just need to understand that that name is the opposite of what it's actually doing. Just like the Affordable Health Care Act turned out not to be an Affordable Health Care Act at all. Same with any one of these programs that has a name. Any government program that even sounds really amazing, whatever the name is, they're doing the opposite of that name. And so they're not teaching social or emotional learning. Like you said, they are brainwashing our children to hate everything about American society, everything about the Judeo-Christian ethic, everything about the nuclear family. And this is not an exaggeration. If you think it is, it's because you have not educated yourself yet. And so that is why I had Julie on. That's why I think that this film is, to me, it's a toe in the water for people who are not aware of really what's going on. And hopefully watching this film will lead them to do more research. You have an incredible lineup of thinkers in this film. It's really fun to watch. James Lindsay, who is probably one of, I think, the most researched anti-communists out there. And he makes a lot of people mad, and he says a lot of things that are surprising. In fact, talking about the woke right now, but if you follow along, you'll see that he's right every time. Trevor Loudon, Alex Newman, Lisa Logan, these are all very well-researched, knowledgeable people on what's happening in our society today. And so this film is well worth your time, especially if this topic is still fuzzy to you. A couple of quotes. Well, I already quoted James Lindsay earlier, but Trevor Loudon said this in the film: if we're going to save the West, we have to save America. And people might think, what does that even mean? But Western civilization is what allows Christianity to flourish all over the world. It is Western civilization that has spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is Western civilization that has given us freedom, capitalism, so many of the good things that now your children are being taught are the bad things. Western civilization is the foundation for all of these good things. And so he's right. If we're going to save the West, which saves the world, we have to start in America, because America has the foundation to make it happen. Our Constitution, capitalism, all of these things allow us to save the West. So I know we just went way down deep into, how imperative it is that people understand what's happening in the public schools, but this film should shake everyone who's thinking, well, my kid's teacher is a Christian. She goes to our church. And like you said, even the teachers don't understand how deeply embedded this Marxism is in their education. Like when they went to school to become a teacher, it was already embedded in their education. And so when you have several generations taught this way, the teachers themselves have to be trained to see the Marxism before they understand that they're part of the problem. And this is not to slam teachers. It's to say, please understand, please wake up and do your research and understand what the system did to you and now how you are helping to perpetrate this mess that's happening.
It's the same parallel with doctors who they go to become a doctor because they care about people and they want to help people. And then they're made to do things that end up harming people, like during COVID. They were made to
Yes.
do a lot of things, and most of them went along with it because they thought they were doing the right thing. And I don't know how many of them have had a wake-up call since seeing the data,
Some
but
have.
yeah, but it's the same thing. It's people that are part of a system. They don't have the ability in and of themselves, teachers, to completely like do a different separate thing.
Hmm.
They're part of a system, just like doctors are. And if you try to break out of that system and you're still in the system, usually there's repercussions.
Yes. Yes, and especially in the internet world that we live in, it's really hard to stand out for doing something different as far as, like you said, a doctor or a teacher or even Christians who are saying that social justice is not Christianity. The internet will come at you. It's not pretty. You have to be bold and you have to be confident in your understanding of what you're doing and then go for it because um mainstream media and the web itself, it's all left leaning, and it's all, I mean, this is one of the institutions that has been subverted by the cultural Marxists. And so even though there are free pockets on the internet where you can find the truth, it is hard to find it if you don't know what you're searching for, just like a Google search. You have to know exact terms to find what you really want. Otherwise, you get the narrative, you get the leftist narrative. And so it's not a slam on doctors either, or pastors, or anyone that hasn't figured this stuff out. And so that's why I really appreciate your movie, because it is an easy, fairly pleasant way to get the truth out to more and more people. Now, I would tell most people that you could watch this with your teenagers. I know there are a couple of scenes that obviously portrayed our culture in some very raw ways. I think it's well done, and there's some bleeps and things, but what do you normally recommend for parents who might be interested in showing their older kids?
I would say 16 and up, or if you have a mature 14 and 15-year-old,
Mhm.
um, you might want to watch it first. Definitely not for
Yeah.
young kids. My son is almost 11 and he has not seen my film.
Okay. Yeah, and also I think if your kids have been in public school, they've probably been exposed to most every single thing that's discussed in this film, and so they would be ready to see it from another viewpoint. I love that you approach this with a biblical worldview and not just the capitalist worldview, because capitalism is awesome, but it's not our religion, and that's what I feel like many people in America need to remember, is that first we have the biblical worldview, and then we have the American Republic with a constitution and capitalism, and those things work well together if they're allowed to. So before we close, I just want to bring up the fact that you are a homeschool mom, but not just a homeschool mom, you are a single homeschool mom. And I think that'll be intriguing to a lot of people out there who either are already trying to do this as single moms or single dads, or would like to try. So can you share just a little bit about that journey that you're on?
Yeah, I mean, so I sent my son went to kindergarten at a charter school and then COVID happened.
Mhm.
And then also the next school year for first grade, it was going to be masking. And so I was like, I'm not sending my son has an August birthday. So he's the youngest in his class and he has some special needs. I was like, I'm not sending my 6-year-old, barely 6-year-old, turning 6 like the first week of school, who is a little bit speech delayed. I'm not sending him to school in a mask for 7 hours a day. No way.
No.
So I was like, yeah. And then so I looked into the at home. They had the like, that you could like school your child at home but still be in the school. And I looked at the curriculum and it was just atrocious. It was so bad. We were supposed to be sitting on a computer all day with my six
Yeah.
year old son. No. So I was like, okay, we're doing homeschool. And then I had a dream that helped me because my son has a lot of challenges and it's stressful, quite honestly. And then also
Mhm.
that was around when my marriage fell apart and I needed to leave. And so there was a time for 1 year during that time later where I did put my son in school, ironically, to finish my book, Beneath Sheep's Clothing, and finish the chapters on the communist subversion of education.
Oh
My
no.
son was in a different charter school for a year, but we've been homeschooling for the last few years and have no plans on putting him in school unless it's some sort of like micro school co-op situation. I mean, I work from home, so that makes it somewhat more doable, but I mean, the truth is that it doesn't take a lot of time to homeschool. And then by the time it takes more time to homeschool, the child should be able to do much of that independently. So we're
Yes.
going into homeschool fifth grade starting this later this month. And my son is a little bit less mature. My son is on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
And so he's a little less mature in some ways. And so I would have done this sooner if he was a little more mature. But like really, I'm going to be working on helping him own his own experience. I don't unschool. I do have requirements. My son does need structure. So, but I'm going to be having him, instead of me giving him, this is what we're doing today, I'm going to give him more choice and more ability to own that. But one thing I've relied on, I think I mentioned this to you when I talked to you before, and I think you mentioned that other people do this too, is what I would do. And he's a little bit more mature now, but when he was younger and I was homeschooling him and working from home, as we would do homeschool, let's say from 10 to noon. And then I had different homeschool families in the area with, let's say, a bunch of kids and let's say a 14-year-old daughter. And he would go over there a few days a week.
Yes.
And I would pay the 14-year-old and he would have other kids to play with. There's tons of homeschool activities and drop off things where, once a week, drop them off for this thing that they do. There's so many homeschoolers now with so many options. And I can't say that it's easy. I can say that it's definitely worth it. I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't want to like shock people, but just think of like, let's say you found out your child's school, there was like a radiation leak somehow at your child's school. And there was like a lot of cancer cases popping up, a lot of kids getting cancer and dying. Like, let's say 6 kids in the school in the last year got cancer. And statistically, that shouldn't be happening. Well, but your kid's still fine. My kid doesn't have cancer. Are you going to keep sending your kid to the school where there's some radiation leak and you don't know, is your child going to get cancer next year or in 20 years or 5 years? Or maybe they'll be one of the few that doesn't get cancer. But like it's the same type of situation with sending our kids to the public schools, and that's charter schools too, unfortunately, is we don't know. And what would you do? Would you do anything you could to not send your child to the school with a
Right.
radiation leak? Whatever sacrifice is necessary. It's the same type of situation that we're in here.
It is. I think that's important. What you said, it's not easy to do this, especially as a single mom, but it's worth it. And their childhood is very short. And then whatever was hard, it's going to be worth it. And you'll look back. I believe most people look back and say, I'm glad I did that. I was glad. I homeschooled as a single mom for several years, and it was so hard. I will not lie, but I don't regret a single bit of it. I don't regret anything that I lost personally from that because my daughters were home with me, they were safe, and they were getting the kind of education that I chose for them and not whatever was the most free and convenient one, which is, as you said, it's akin to radiation in these days. So I'm glad you shared that because I think everyone needs to hear that. And so that's another reason, guys, to support what Julie's doing because you're supporting a single homeschool mom. So speaking of support, where can my listeners see Beneath Sheep's Clothing?
Yeah, go to beneathsheepsclothing.movie and you can stream it online there. If you purchase the streaming, which I actually reduced the price, it's $7.99. You can watch it as many times as you want. I do have it on Rumble now for pay per view. It's $4.99 to watch it one time on Rumble. We also have DVDs that we're selling at beneathsheepsclothing.movie. People can buy extended interview footage. And then I'm working on making some small, like mini films on specific areas. The first one is going to be to expose social and emotional learning and whole child education. It's in the film, but I'm going to make like a short, targeted and free for everyone. If anyone wants to help me with that, I'm at givesendgo.com/unwokify. UNWOKIFY. Even a $10 donation will help. I'm trying to get this first short film, like 10 minutes long, made in the next couple of weeks. And again, these other videos I'm making are going to be free, and they're more like free mini films that I hope are persuasive to wake people up.
I think that's a great idea. Film is video is number one, and so people will stop and watch that before they'll read an article many times. So I'm not that way. I'm old fashioned. I like to read stuff, but I love sharing videos that are well done, just like your film Beneath Sheep's Clothing. So I'm gonna make sure that all these links that Julie mentioned are in the show notes if you want to find her. And Julie, what social media platforms can people find you on?
I'm on X. And if you go to beneathsheepsclothing.movie, the links are there. I'm on X, Instagram, and Facebook, but I probably spend more time on X.
Okay. Well, this has been very exciting to have you on here because I really can't stress enough how well done this film is and how important it is for all Americans and not just Americans, but I really do feel like it's going to help educate more and more Americans, especially parents, especially Christians. In fact, I noticed that you have an option to purchase like a licensing to show a whole church or a big group to show the film too. And so I think that's a really good idea. If you've got whether it's a political group or a church group or just a homeschool group or something, this is a really good film to show a larger crowd. And so you can actually purchase the permission to do that on her website too. So everyone, please go and watch Beneath Sheep's Clothing and check out what else Julie's working on for the future and try to support this work because it is very important. Thank you for joining me today, Julie. And I will probably have to have you back on once you get some new videos uploaded, and we'll talk about those too.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to my podcast today. If you want more content like this, you can go to my website at nickitruesdell.com. That's NICKITRUESDELL.com. And find me on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.